Domestic violence is a pattern of tactics used by the offender against the victim, from threats and coercion to intimidation to sexual assault to economic abuse to socio-psychological abuse. It's a hovering sort of a mass of kind of just tactics that just take the air out of the room. I've experienced it as a responding officer. And they'll use these tactics against the victim in the most sophisticated way.
Domestic violence can affect every avenue of someone's life. Batterers are very manipulative, and they find a way to use that power and control in any way possible to keep their victim captive and under their control.
What we know, and we know this from study after study after study, is most of these offenders learn violence at an early age and they practice it most of their lives. And it's true, we see it. We see these offenders, they're comfortable with privilege, they're comfortable with control, they're comfortable with possessing people to the point to where you are less than human in that relationship.
Me and Candace, we grew up in a family. We grew up in West Dayton. My mom and dad had 8 kids, so Candace is number 8 for my mom.
Outgoing, funny, had a lot of jokes to tell. She's outgoing, but she's a family person. You know, she loved being around her family.
Candace was a normal teenager. She went to school every day. She wasn't problematic in school, high school. Had normal friends, teenagers, same friends all throughout. She was full of life.
She met this new guy and she is so in love. That's like she was really liking Brent when they first met. Everything appeared to be good.
I seen him at a basketball game and I was with my cousin. A couple weeks later, she got the number and she gave her my number and we exchanged numbers and we kind of started talking on the phone. That's how it started.
Typical. You give my number, I get your number. You call me, maybe if you call me, I might talk. And I think Brent called her, and they just kind of went back and forth from there. And next thing you know, here's Brent.
Fun to be around, you know, excited, get butterflies in my stomach. Can't wait to, you know, see him again. That period lasts from 17 to 20, about 2 years.
Once Candace moved out from my mom's house, that's when things started to become different. Candace wasn't the same old jolly Candace how she would normally be.
In the beginning, Candace wasn't talking about when they started the fighting. I'm pretty sure she was just embarrassed and didn't want us to know, so she kept a lot from us.
Name calling, cussing you out, being disrespectful in front of friends, his friends, you know, around a crowd of people. He was bringing me down so bad. The abuse mentally was just making me, I was too big. I needed to lose weight, that kind of mental abuse. He was abusing me mentally like that.
They appeared to be happy, but then that's when Candace started acting different because we couldn't figure out how come my mom would always cook on holidays and, you know, on Sundays, we'd all be at the house. I mean, everybody would, you know, that's just what we would do for as a family. And she'd be like, come here and get you something to eat. But he never would come. And then the times she had a plate for him, she would take it outside to him. I'm like, how come he's not coming in? So that appeared to be kind of strange to me.
I didn't find out about the broken arm till a couple weeks ago. And I said something to Candace about that just the other day. And that was something else, just containing and just building on with the lies of trying to protect Brent. You just not knowing, wanting anyone to know what was really going on. Like I remember when it happened, she said that she was in a car accident. So, I mean, hey, we're not together every day, every moment, so that's what we believed.
We had got into an altercation. He had bent my arm, my right arm, and broke my right arm. I did get medical attention. I went to Miami Valley, but when I went, I never told him what had happened. You know, just still, you know, covering for him. Didn't want him in any trouble.
My nieces was over her house one time, and Brent, he did jump on her. He started fighting her, and they had to call the police. And so that's when everything really came to light about what's really been going on with Candace and Brent.
My life with Michael was long. I had known him since I was 11. And the abuse didn't start till I was 17. So I had 6 years of, him being my best friend and, us kicking it and all that stuff. He knew all my secrets. He was my confidant. So he knew what to use against me when things would get bad. But he wanted to hurt me. He knew what to say. After the strangling happened, there were a few really bad times, and I don't know exactly how often that I would pass out, and sometimes it would take days for me to get right afterwards. When I would wake up, I would have to go take a shower because I would have, messed myself while I was out, because I don't know how long I was out.
We're now understanding the crime of strangulation. It is an attempted murder case. We've dealt with it as a minor crime or less than a minor crime for years. The moment you put your hands around someone's throat and start applying pressure, you're putting them at risk of death.
Did I believe he was going to kill me? Yeah. I didn't think I was going to live to see 30. He couldn't have told me he wasn't going to kill me.
I was strangled once in Kettering, my apartment in Kettering. I had my nieces over, and we had got into an altercation, and he had strangled me. I called the police then too. I think that when he was strangling me, he was letting me know that he was in control.
There's a psychological aspect of it too. I want you to know that I can put your neck in my hands and I can take you to near death and I can kill you any time I want to. And they want that victim to know that. That will ensure that victim won't talk to a responding officer, won't expose the offender whatsoever because they weigh it out. If I report it, will he strangle me again and kill me?
The neighbors would call the police when they would hear things that they thought was getting out of control. I mean, it would get to, they wouldn't call every time it happened. It would have to be very loud and banging is when they would call. But the police would come, and when they would come, they would be like, well, what do you want us to do? Because he's not here. He would step out into the sidewalk or step out into the street. And they're like, well, he's not even on your property. There's nothing we can do.
They're very good at this. This is the thing they do the best. Using violence in a way where it can't be detected, where it's very calculated, it's very specific, it's very focused, and it's hidden for years and years and years from family and friends and the police.
I endured punching, smacking, pulling my hair out, dragging me out of cars. He would tell me if I left, he would do something to my mother. The last threat was when I was pregnant, when he said he was gonna kill me and my baby, my unborn child.
She was fine and happy that she was pregnant by Brent because, of course, that was her boyfriend and she loved Brent so much. But when she got pregnant is when I think things really got worse.
We had a couple fights after he found out I was pregnant, but he said he was gonna stop. And I told him that if he didn't stop, I was leaving. He had pulled like a chunk of my hair out. He had me by my hair, was jumping on me. And I ended up calling 911. They came. When they came, it was a female and it was a male. They were out there for a minute. I opened the door. I'm like, I want him out. He don't live here. His name ain't on the list. I want him out. They never took him nowhere. The female officer told me that as long as he get mail here, he don't have to leave. So I said, I asked her, can I end up leaving? So I left him in my apartment, and I left him out there. They didn't do nothing to him. That was like maybe the third time living out there I had called.
When victims reach out for help, a lot of times they aren't believed. A lot of that has to do with people's preconceived notions or their own personal ideas of what abuse should look like. So when they start very early talking about the red flags or behaviors that are warning signs to them, they're not normally believed. Even if it gets to the physical aspect of the abuse, it's usually not believed because she should have left.
We have to give victim options, not instructions. I tell male police officers, especially every day when I train, don't go into a home filled with domestic violence and tell a woman what she needs to do. She already has somebody doing that. She already has that controlling husband that tells her what kind of lipstick to wear, what dress to wear, what school to go to, what church to go to, who to associate with, what to make for dinner that night. She doesn't need somebody else to tell her what to do. She needs options. Give me options. Tell me where I can go, when I can go, what it's going to cost, how easy is it, can I afford it, will I be retaliated against? Because at the end of the day, the victim's thinking this: when bad things happen to him, worse things happen to me.
It's not about why we stay. It's not about why didn't you leave. When you're in that situation, you just can't. It's easy for somebody to say from the outside looking in, but when you're on the inside, there's things that you do. I ran away 4 times, and he always found me. And it was worse every time after he found me, it was worse. People don't protect you. You're the only one that can protect yourself, and you do it to the best of your ability. Sometimes that means going back. Sometimes that does mean going back. Don't end up in a box. There was the one incident when the police came, and the man handed me his wallet and said, "Go find you a place to stay," because I could only hold him an hour. And I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do with that? I mean, I'm supposed to go somewhere for an hour? I mean, I only have an hour to find some place to go. Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? I have a daughter. She has to go to school tomorrow. What do you mean you can't hold him for no more than an hour?
Only 1 in 5 said they felt safe after they called the police. Now, if you're responsible in law enforcement and in government, in the criminal justice system, you've got to look at that number and say, why, and what are we doing? It's not what the victim's doing. What are we doing to keep that victim from calling? If it's hard to get a protective order, if it's hard to go to shelter, if it's hard to find a school system for your kids when you move out, if it's hard to find a meal that afternoon, you're not going to leave.
I pressed charges once, and when it came time for court, I went to the courtroom. We went into the ante room, and it was a little room. There was an officer sitting at the desk, and there was one at the door. And they took my name, and while I was there, and here he come in, and he's sitting there, and he's threatening me, telling me how bad it's going to be when this is over and all this other stuff. And the people are listening to him, and they're not doing anything about it. I mean, he started pinching me in the arm and stuff like that, pushing me, and every time they would turn their head. And I got up and I told the people, I said, I can't sit in here with him. And they're like, well, if you leave, we'll just dismiss the charges. I said, I can't sit here. And I left.
And he said something to me, he punched me while I was driving on the highway. He had punched me so hard that I ended up getting off on the exit. So I called 911. I'm like, I want a person in my house. I give him the address. It's like kind of chilly outside. It's like October. I'm gonna wait for him outside, but it's getting colder. And so I said, forget it, I'm just gonna go in. And when I got in there, I heard him say, I'm so tired of you. Every time we get in a fight, you scratch me. But you know how like when somebody hits you, you like kind of block? I believe like when he punched me, I kind of like blocked because I'm driving. He comes out of the restroom and first thing he do is punches me. So now when he punched me, I done like kind of backed up in the where the baby's room was supposed to be. It's like a tubby right there. I trip over the tubby. I mean, and he's like kicking me, he's fighting. I mean, he's like kicking me, punching me in my face. The only way I got away was I like kind of crawled away, but it was not, and I say it and I can say it still today after 15 years, I was not, it's like I was fighting like him and somebody else. Like, it's just like it wasn't just him. It was like him and whatever he was dealing with. That makes sense?
A lot of times when the survivors that I've worked with that are incarcerated, the big difference is at the time the incident occurred, like they see him in a different way. Once he's abusing, they're more fearful. He looks different in his eyes.
I lifted up because I was straight on my back. And when I lift up, I seen blood all over my hands. And I was like, oh my God. I'm like, we are in trouble. And he like, no. He like kind of coaching me, like what to say. No, we in trouble. So I go to the bathroom. I get a towel and I tie his leg up. And he's like, we're coming up with things to say, him and I. So I called the police back. Like my calls was like maybe like 6 minutes apart. And I'm like, I need a paramedic. The lady talking to me. But while she's talking to me, I'm like going back and forth to the bathroom. I vaguely remember her saying, didn't you just call? And I was like, yeah, I did. I called, but now I need a paramedic. So we talk and I hear a knock at the door. I went to go open the door. I had blood all over me from helping them, being over them. So when they come in, they had their guns out. So the one officer went to the back and one sat me down on the couch. Then I seen some more people come in vaguely. I guess it was the paramedic, and they still had me sitting there. And then I heard them say, we lost his pulse. And I I'm sorry.
We was crying like babies. We was talking about, at the time we didn't know what happened because we haven't talked to Candace. So we didn't know the story about what happened. We were just hearing it on the news.
I just really think that was a freak accident. And that's what happens when we're put in predicaments like that. That easily, that quick, our life has changed.
I've been on the scene of calls where women are very, very concerned, and they say, please, I'm going to tell you what I did to him, but let me tell you why. Because they worry we're not going to see the contextual picture of the crime. And that means everything. Context means everything. We have to understand that road that led to that moment where she scratched or she bit or she kicked or she hit, or maybe she used a weapon that was an equalizer that was justified. Everything comes to that moment where you have to understand that environment she lived in and what she lived through and what she thought about saving her kids and her own life. So we can't just say she used force. We have to look at all the things that are behind that moment where she used force so we can understand why she did it and was it justified.
Here's Candace looking like the bad guy because this man is dead. And it just looks like, hey, she killed this man. She came in the house, stabbed him, and he's dead. That's what it looked like. And that was the story. And that wasn't the truth of the matter. And anyone that knew what was going on, there was no way that Candace would have ever wanted to hurt Brent, most definitely kill him.
The relationship with me and my first attorney was distant. I fired him because he wasn't coming to see me. I didn't know anything. And I didn't feel like that he was representing me the right way. I wish he would have had a little bit more knowledge about women that had been abused, you know. I wish he would have just digged a little bit more, studied a little more, asked more questions, to people that knew a little bit more than him. He didn't ask questions at all to anybody. He's just like, if you never experienced something like that, you don't know it. So it's just best to ask questions to people that have experienced things like that.
One of the things that initially jumped out at me as well as to my other colleagues was essentially just a complete lack of a discussion regarding the history of violence that was in her relationship. There was a pretty well documented history of the decedent in this case attacking Candace on multiple occasions. There was also a lot of documented evidence of him attacking other women in similar fashions. So it was a little disturbing that the jury did not get an opportunity to hear most, if any, of that evidence.
When you think about cases, and if you want an attorney to represent you, you necessarily want to hire somebody that is specialized or at least has knowledge and training and experience in the field of which you are either being indicted on, criminally charged with, or if your defense is specific, as it is in battered women syndrome cases.
If that history of violence is not important to trial counsel, it's going to be hard for trial counsel to sell its importance to a jury, or if in a bench trial to a judge. Again, our job is to be zealous advocates, and a part of that zealous advocacy is to aggressively pursue these avenues.
I met with him for a few minutes. The day I bonded out, I went over and he talked to me for a minute, said he would get back with me. And I met with him in the courtroom long enough for me to walk in the courtroom, say what we needed to say, and then he was gone. I couldn't talk to him anymore after that. And I talked to him the night before we went to trial. We went up there and he told my mom and dad that he recommended me to have a judge trial and not the jury trial because that would take too long. My mom said, "You're going to do what he says," because I said no. She says, "You're going to do what he offers you, or we're just going to leave you out in the cold. We're not going to help you if something happens and you do go to prison." So I ended up agreeing to the one judge trial, and we went to court the next day, and the next day after that it was over. I was on my way to Marysville, 23 to life.
2 hours turned into 6, 6 turned into 8. And it was a little bit after 8 o'clock at night when they called us back. And when they found me guilty of 2 counts of murder, I couldn't believe it. I think I went numb. My whole body went numb, and when I went to go turn, I seen everybody crying. I'm thinking, I gotta be strong, I got this thing that I think I'm just so strong. And I went to go look, and I'm just like, then my baby's right there, and everybody's crying, and I just couldn't believe it.
I would be remiss if I didn't talk about these women and their low risk to reoffend. We don't talk about that enough, and I think people assume that because they committed such a heinous crime and someone's dead, that they are the worst of the worst, and that therefore they should stay in prison for the rest of their lives. People aren't always cognizant of the fact that a lot of these women have no prior criminal history, despite the fact that they have a lot of abuse in their history.
I would like the people to have known that this is the incident that occurred was a one-time incident. It will never happen again. Out of all those years, that's the only time I ever actually fought back. I would run, I would try to hide, but it was the actual only time I ever fought back.
I am not arguing that the capacity to understand the wrongfulness of their crime. And in many of these cases, that's not at issue. A lot of the women feel a lot of deep remorse for what occurred, and they accept responsibility in that regard. But what we're really talking about in battered women's syndrome cases is the fact that the women did not feel that they had any other means to escape except for use of force due to the imminent threat of bodily harm or death that their abuser is causing.
What we see is that police use force to protect themselves from murder and assault from offenders. But it's interesting when we talk to judges and prosecutors and police around the country, they hesitate when they look at women's use of force.
Thinking that because knowing that he's gone, then it makes it easier. It doesn't. Because now I have to deal with being responsible for him not being here. And I don't know if that's worse or not, but it's the truth. So now that's what I'm living with. And I still have ghosts. Somebody moves too fast, I'm flinching and moving. Somebody bump up against me too hard, flash me if I'm not paying attention, and that'll be with me for a very long time.
There is a certain importance to their stories, and I think there's a lot of emphasis placed on, trying to keep some of those stories out. And in order to have a good understanding of that person's state of mind or Candace's state of mind in that particular moment, you have to know their story, and you have to embrace that history.
I've worked with every kind of victim on the planet as a criminal investigator, from wives of ministers to police chiefs' wives to corporate executives to filmmakers. Once we understand that anybody can be that victim, anybody can be vulnerable to this kind of offender, I think we'll start to understand that victim if she does strike out in self-defense.
It impacted us in a big way because we all have helped raise her daughter, which we enjoy doing it. When I buy my daughter something, and for Christmas, I just make sure I take care of her daughter too. Instead of take care of her while she's in there, emotionally, financially, while she's there.
It makes you sad for not only your client, but for the state of our system. And Candace's case is one of those cases. She had a story to tell, and unfortunately, she didn't have the best opportunity to tell that story. And she's in prison now for 18 years to life. And so there's literally 2 or 3 tragedies here. It's one that you have this relatively young woman potentially spending the rest of her life in prison. She has a 13-year-old daughter who I believe will be 14 years old soon, who has only known her mother across a table in a penitentiary. And you also have someone who's dead. And these are all tragedies, many of which could have been avoided.